don't think anybody ever comes to work in the morning wanting to restrain or seclude a kid.
Restraints and seclusions are not therapeutic. In fact, I'm always concerned that when students are involved in restraints and seclusions in our school, that they're experiencing a traumatic event. The last kid that you want to use a restraint or a seclusion on is a student who's experienced trauma in their life. And those are the kids that are most likely to be restrained or secluded. If you're not spending a lot of time restraining and secluding kids, and instead spend your time alongside the kid, trying to understand the problem from their perspective and designing a solution, it's a much better use of your time.
We are not breaking the budget trying to reduce restraint and seclusion at all. It is actually helping.
If a child is doing something that is very unsafe or potentially could be very unsafe, we obviously have to intervene. But in the act of intervening and restraining or secluding, then injuries also occur. So, I mean, we're trying to prevent the child from being unsafe, but we're also doing something that is unsafe in order to prevent them. Yeah. I don't know what the answer to that would be, other than to try and reduce restraint and seclusion as much as we possibly can.
Hi, this is Dr. Ross Green. This program is sponsored by the Maine-based nonprofit Lives in the Balance and the Maine Department of Education. As you're probably well aware, legislation here in Maine has made it clear that reducing the use of restraint and seclusion in schools is a necessity and a high priority. The good news is no one wants to restrain or seclude a kid anyway, but there's been very little guidance on how to actually go about reducing and perhaps even ultimately eliminating the use of those procedures. This free resource is intended to fill the gap. Now, you may hear things that you disagree with, and that's okay. Keep an open mind. Reducing restraint and seclusion means thinking and doing things differently. Now, many school staff, especially those working with students who have concerning behaviors, have difficulty imagining not needing restraint and seclusion. You're working with very difficult kids under very difficult circumstances. You don't have perfect knowledge of or oversight or control over a student's home life. And concerning behaviors, it often seems, can occur from out of the blue. Now, I'll be working hard to persuade you that that last part is not true. Concerning behaviors do not occur out of the blue. And that's a very big part of reducing the use and reliance on restraint and seclusion. It's also important to know that there are many, many schools out there that are working with equally difficult students under equally difficult circumstances who are not using restraint and seclusion. How do they do it? And how have so many that were using restraint and seclusion stopped using restraint and seclusion? Many of the strategies you're about to learn about have helped them get there. So, let's get started.
Teachers want to do well if they can. That's really all of us, right? Nobody wants to come to work and feel this way. You know, when they've restrained or secluded a kid, they don't really enjoy that. And I believe that, and that's the good in things, and that's the hope that we have.
So when I first started in this role, we had restraints and seclusions on a daily basis. It was part of what a behavior program is. It was expected. It was concerning, but not alarming enough to make us do things differently. But it never felt good. You know, staff got hurt, students got hurt. We had ambulances coming to our schools. You know, we had it was just it wasn't helping kids to make progress in the way that we really were responsible to help kids.
It was concerning. It was really concerning because, I mean, people were getting hurt, and emotionally the kids, I mean, just to be that dysregulated that much of the time, like it was hard to watch them struggling that way and to be so upset all the time. And my staff, I mean, between watching the kids and getting hurt all the time, my staff was getting burned out and they weren't feeling good, and it just wasn't a happy place to be. Anytime one kiddo started to escalate, it kind of set the whole classroom off. Learning stopped for everybody, so there wasn't a ton of learning going on.
This is not good for kids. That is really what the problem is. This causes way more issues for our kids, and clearly it's not working, what we're doing. So let's look at alternative ways and find some ways to train people. Training is huge. You can't just go in and think that it's going to happen. So it's like a different way of thinking.
The first thing you should know is that reducing or even eliminating restraint and seclusion requires commitment. This has to be a priority. This has to be something we are committing to doing. And in fact, what I find is that once we commit to doing it, just committing to reducing the use of restraint and seclusion alone, just making a conscious effort and trying really hard not to do it anymore, can get rid of about 50% of restraint and seclusion. The other 50% requires some changes in lenses, timing, and practices. It's that other 50% that we'll be talking about in this program. Now, why is it hard to imagine no longer needing restraint and seclusion anymore? Because it's hard to imagine the absence of the concerning behaviors that often cause adults to feel need to use crisis management strategies, such as de-escalating, giving a kid a break from an activity that they're struggling with or a task, and restraint and seclusion. Now, you might be wondering, why am I calling those practices crisis management strategies when so many people refer to them as crisis prevention strategies? Well, this graphic tells the tale. This is the sequence of restraint and seclusion. Yep, restraint and seclusion occurs at the end of a pretty straightforward sequence depicted in the graphic that you're looking at right now. What you're seeing on this graphic is 5 bubbles, all of them reflecting the sequence that ultimately ends up in a student being restrained and secluded. The colors of the bubbles are meaningful. In blue, everything that's early, crisis prevention. In red, everything that's late, crisis management. You don't want to be late. You want to be early. Crisis management is late. If you're late, you're in crisis management mode. What's early? Recognizing that a student is having difficulty meeting a particular expectation, and, as you'll be hearing, solving that problem with that student proactively so that you never find yourself in the red. And if that's what we were mostly doing with kids with concerning behaviors, the ones who we are restraining and secluding the most, we wouldn't be restraining and secluding them almost ever. The problem is that's not what we're mostly doing. What is the prototypical first adult response when a student is having difficulty meeting a particular expectation? Red bubble number 1. insist harder, push the kid harder, founded, I think, on the belief that pushing the kid harder elicits better performance. But that hasn't been my experience, especially with kids with concerning behaviors. Pushing the kid harder, in my experience, doesn't elicit better performance. What does it elicit? Behavior. Concerning behavior. And we are now in red bubble number 2, behavior that communicates to us that the student is having difficulty meeting a particular expectation. Now, hang on to that. That's critical, because that's what concerning behavior is. We've all heard that behavior is communication. What is behavior communicating? That there is an expectation a student is having difficulty meeting. I want to make a very important point here. The concerning behavior is late. The expectation the kid was already having difficulty meeting, that already happened. The behavior that communicates that the kid is having difficulty meeting that expectation is late. And interventions that are focused on modifying that concerning behavior are interventions that are focused on what's late. What do we do in response to that concerning behavior? If it's concerning enough, we come to the conclusion that the kid is becoming escalated. And we have now arrived at red bubble number 3. What do we do when we conclude that a student is becoming escalated? We deploy our de-escalation strategies. And you are now very late. When our de-escalation strategies don't get the job done, what do we do next? We restrain or seclude the kid, something we didn't want to do, but we do it. We are now very, very late. Why do we do it? Well, because we've been taught that restraining and secluding kids is a crisis prevention strategy. Now you know it is a crisis management strategy. You are now very, very late in the sequence. We were also taught that restraint and seclusion keep us and the kids safer. There are no data telling us that. In fact, the data that I'm aware of tell us that it is when we are restraining and secluding a kid that we and they are more likely to get hurt. This graphic is very important. It tells us what's early. It tells us what's late. It tells us what's true crisis prevention and what's really crisis management. All right. So we need to get out of the heat of the moment, which is when restraint and seclusion is mostly used. We have to create structures and adopt mindsets that keep us out of the heat of the moment and move away from structures and mindsets that are focused primarily on what we're going to do should we find ourselves in the heat of the moment. And that is a major shift in focus when it comes to how we're training staff who are working with our most vulnerable kids, the ones with concerning behaviors. It could lead to a shift in how we do business in our classroom. Crisis prevention, true crisis prevention, requires shifts in structures and mindsets. That shift begins with focusing on the problems that are causing concerning behaviors, as you saw in the graphic, rather than on the concerning behaviors themselves.
We were never really addressing what was at the root of the dysregulation or the difficulty for that student. We weren't partnering with the student. We were doing something to the student that the student might not even be aware of why or what. So it wasn't meaningful. It wasn't solving the problem. We were getting into power struggles with kids. And when you get in a power struggle, students become more dysregulated and adults become more dysregulated. Placing an expectation on a student that they're having difficulty meeting over and over and over again does not help them to learn.
Again, it goes back to the training. There was such big emphasis on training on restraint and seclusion. How could we think any differently? But the law says it's okay to do it this way. The trainers are saying it's okay to do it this way. Oh, and it's therapeutic. So we're now trying to change that mindset. Restraint and seclusion is not a therapeutic method for kids with disabilities, for kids without disabilities. I don't want to have anybody putting their hands on me. And can you imagine how a kid feels when somebody that they're supposed to trust puts their hands on them? And that's with them forever. Even if we think it's not, it is.
If kids are having difficulties, significant difficulties with challenging behaviors, we are placing expectations on them that they're having difficulty meeting. And we need to think about what those expectations are and either consider modifying those expectations or taking them away altogether, which was one of the most difficult pieces, I think, for our, or mindset shifts for our teams, was that it is on the table to take expectations away. That was really hard.
As you already know, what is concerning behavior communicating? That there's an expectation the student is having difficulty meeting. So I appreciate why we have been so focused on the concerning behavior. It could be scary, it could be unsafe, but dramatically reducing or ultimately eliminating the use of restraint and seclusion means focusing instead on the expectations the student is having difficulty meeting that are causing those concerning behaviors that are setting the entire sequence in motion. Now, I'm going to be referring to those unmet expectations as unsolved problems. By the way, also known as problems that have yet to be solved, problems that are waiting to be solved. Let me give you some examples of what I mean by unsolved problems. Difficulty sitting next to Susie during choice time. Difficulty completing the double-digit subtraction problems in math. Difficulty coming back into the classroom after recess. Difficulty coming into the classroom in the morning. Difficulty keeping hands to self in the hallway between classes. Those are the kinds of expectations many students have difficulty meeting that could be giving rise to concerning behaviors. Now, here's what's interesting. In some kids, those unsolved problems don't give rise to concerning behaviors, and in some they do. We will be discussing why that might be soon enough. Now, you might be wondering, well, what behaviors are we talking about here? Well, there are lots of different ways of categorizing concerning behaviors that kids exhibit. In research, we have sliced the pie by calling those concerning behaviors internalizing or externalizing. I find that a lot of kids do both, so I don't actually find that distinction to be especially useful. In the trauma literature, we've sliced the pie by calling those concerning behaviors fight versus flight. That's fine. It doesn't give me the information I really need about the kid because I'm still focused on the concerning behaviors rather than the problems that are causing those concerning behaviors. Plus, some kids are both fight and flight. The diagnostic manual gives us lots of different ways of slicing the pie of concerning behaviors. Just remember, when you're talking about a diagnosis, you're still talking about concerning behaviors because the diagnostic criteria is just a long list of concerning behaviors for those childhood psychiatric diagnoses. I don't find those categories to be especially useful. The categories that I've been using lately are lucky and unlucky. Now, don't take lucky versus unlucky too seriously. I just use those two categories to make a very important point. What are lucky ways of communicating that there are expectations you're having difficulty meeting? whining, pouting, sulking, withdrawing, crying. I'm not being exhaustive here. Why are those concerning behaviors what I call lucky? They're not going to get you popped into timeout, not going to get you held in from recess, not going to get you held after school, not going to get you a detention, suspension, expulsion, not going to get you restrained, not going to get you secluded, not going to get you hit, yes, as in corporal punishment, not going to get you arrested at school, but best of all, those lucky ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting certain expectations are highly likely to elicit empathy, nurturance, support from your caregivers. That's a lucky kid. Not so with the unlucky variety. What are unlucky ways of communicating that there are expectations you're having difficulty meeting? You already know, but here's a sampling. Screaming, swearing, hitting, spitting, kicking, biting, throwing, destroying, running. There's worse. Why are those ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting certain expectations unlucky? At the mild end, those ways are going to get you popped into timeout, held in from recess, held after school. Now it's getting a little more serious. Detention, suspension, expulsion, hit, pinned, a restraint, thrown, a seclusion, arrested at school. But worst of all, those unlucky ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting certain expectations are far less likely to elicit empathy, nurturance, support from your caregivers, even though the field of developmental psychopathology has been telling us for a very long time that whether your concerning behaviors are lucky or unlucky, they are communicating the exact same thing. There's an expectation you're having difficulty meeting. Who gets restrained and secluded? Kids who are communicating that they're having difficulty meeting expectations in ways that are unlucky. The good news, as it relates to getting out of the heat of the moment, is that those unsolved problems are actually highly predictable. I know it often doesn't seem that way, but they are. And they can be identified and solved proactively, but not if we're mostly focused on the concerning behaviors that are being caused by those unsolved problems. More on lenses here. Many of us were taught that restraint and seclusion are pretty much an indispensable part of running a classroom or a treatment facility where there are kids with concerning behaviors. I find that's not true. We're going to find out how indispensable those strategies are after we put some effort into reducing their use. Many of the staff in schools and facilities who I and my colleagues at Lives in the Balance have worked with, that's what they said. This is an indispensable part of what we do. And then after they start implementing a lot of the strategies that you're going to be hearing about, they are no longer saying that. It looks like the indispensable ended up being dispensable without sacrificing safety.
Restraints and seclusions do not improve safety in our schools. They actually oftentimes lead to very unsafe situations. They can escalate students further. They can put our adults in situations where they can get hurt. I haven't had a ambulance at one of my elementary schools, really, I don't think since we began this work. Restraints and seclusions are definitely not crisis prevention. Crisis prevention happens way back before you ever get to the point where a student's escalated.
a lot of us were also taught that concerning behaviors are best characterized as attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing. None of those things are true. But in some places, that has caused caregivers to use restraint and seclusion as a behavior modification strategy. Restraint and seclusion should never be used as a behavior modification strategy. No kid deserves restraint and seclusion or has it coming to them. And restraint and seclusion has never solved a single problem that's causing concerning behavior.
In elementary school, the most favorite, often used punishment, so to say, is we're going to take away recess. And so, a kiddo is struggling to understand a math concept. Taking away recess isn't going to fix that. Or if they're upset about something that happened with a peer earlier in the day, again, taking away recess isn't going to solve that. It's just going to upset them further, cause more problems.
We got a significant amount of pushback when we first made the decision that we were going to dramatically reduce restraints and seclusions for our students. I think people were worried about chaos in our classrooms. They were worried about lack of instructional control over our students. I don't think they knew what else to do. At the district level, we really committed to funding good programming and investing in our kids that are most at risk, including adequate staffing, space that's designed to support kids with regulation needs, flexibility within the program, social work support, administrative presence, regular administrative presence. And I think, burnout is real when working with kids with significant regulation needs. So we need to make sure that we have adequate staffing. By that, I mean, we shouldn't have teachers that are stretched really thin. They should have the ability to support kids when they're having big difficulties adequately.
So, why are some kids communicating that they're having difficulty meeting certain expectations in ways that are so maladaptive, or what I call unlucky? What the research that's accumulated on kids with concerning behaviors over the last 40 to 50 years tells us, it's because they're lacking some crucial cognitive skills. Flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving, emotion regulation. Those are your big four. So imagine this, two kids sitting at a desk struggling with the exact same math task. Apparently, they're both lacking skills in math. One of those two kids is very calmly raising their hand and saying, can I get some help over here? And the other one is losing their mind. What's the difference between those two kids? Well, apparently they're both lacking some skills in math, but one of them is lacking some additional skills. Once again, flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving, emotion regulation. The skills that help us human beings, kids included, respond adaptively to problems and frustrations. And restraint and seclusion isn't going to train a single one of those skills. Now, a quick point before we move on. What I find a lot of times in a lot of different settings is us caregivers, with the best of intentions, trying to teach those skills explicitly. It's wonderful that we're trying. But I'm not convinced that those skills, lots of skills can be taught explicitly. I'm not convinced that those skills can be taught explicitly. how are those skills going to get taught then? How is this kid going to get better at those skills so that eventually they are responding to problems and frustrations more adaptively? By engaging them in the process of solving the problems that are causing their concerning behaviors. It's the problem-solving process that helps build and enhance flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving, emotion regulation. As you already know, an unsolved problem is an expectation a student is having difficulty meeting. Some very important themes here as it relates to restraint and seclusion. This is crucial. The last thing we'd want to do is restrain or seclude a kid for expectations we already know they're having difficulty meeting. Rewind the tape on the vast majority of restraint and seclusion, and you will find a student struggling to meet a particular expectation. Not because they're lazy, not because they're unmotivated, not because they're not putting in the effort, not because they're manipulating us, not because they're seeking attention, not because they're coercing us into capitulating to their wishes, not because they're testing limits, but just because they're having difficulty reliably meeting that expectation. So what we're going to be talking about here is expectation management, taking the place of behavior management. We don't want to be putting expectations on kids that we know they're having difficulty reliably meeting, because we know that could set the sequence of restraint and seclusion in motion, and we don't want to do that. So one of the things we really need to do, and you'll be learning how in a few minutes, is identifying both the skills that a student is lacking. That's going to help us understand why this student is responding so poorly to problems and frustrations, and what expectations the student is having difficulty meeting. What are the unsolved problems, so that we know what it is that the student is responding maladaptively to. Mostly that's going to involve different assessment instrumentation, and we will be getting to that very soon. It is also going to involve different interventions. Many kids have lost it in the midst of being punished. If you're thinking that rewards are somehow more benign, many kids lose it when they fail to achieve the anticipated reward that they thought they had coming to them. Plus, those are interventions that are focused primarily on behavior, concerning behavior, and modifying it. And if we want to get rid of restraint and seclusion and be safer, as you already know, we need to focus on the expectations that are causing those concerning behaviors. There is no reward. There is no punishment. There is no consequence that is going to solve those problems.
I think the other thing is not accepting crisis or daily dysregulation as something that happens for kids that struggle behaviorally. It's really a symptom that there is an unsolved problem, and we need to be solving that problem way sooner. We can't be okay with students struggling day after day at a high level. Something's wrong, and we need to figure out what's wrong.
How is the behavior going to get better if we're not modifying it? Well, it's only unsolved problems that cause concerning behavior. Solved problems don't. And the data are crystal clear on the following point. When you are busy solving problems collaboratively and proactively with kids, their behavior improves every bit as much as it would have if all we were busy doing is modifying the kids' concerning behaviors. But, and this is a very big but, if all we're busy doing is modifying the kids' concerning behaviors, the problems that are causing those behaviors remain unsolved. we can no longer be satisfied with merely improving a kid's concerning behaviors if the problems that are causing those behaviors are still unsolved. So what kind of problem solving are we talking about here? We're talking about problem solving of the collaborative kind, not unilateral, collaborative. Something you're doing with the kid, not to the kid. Now, that often causes some questions as well. What about if the kid is a reluctant participant? We solve problems collaboratively with reluctant participants all the time. We find that reluctant participants will participate in the problem-solving process so long as we're not trying to talk with them about their concerning behavior, which causes them to think that they're in trouble, become defensive, and crap out on talking to us. What about kids who are non-speaking? Thanks to any variety of assistive technology, people solve problems collaboratively and proactively with kids who are non-speaking all the time. It's going to look a little bit different. I'm always telling people, don't sell those non-speaking kids short. They can participate in solving the problems that affect their lives. If we're solving problems collaboratively and proactively, are we still holding the kid accountable? A whole lot more than we would have been if all we were doing was rewarding and punishing the kid, something that requires no thought, no involvement on the part of the kid. This means that us adults are off the hook for ingenious solutions. When you're solving problems collaboratively, you got a partner, the kid. Even if you are presently thinking there is no way the kid I'm thinking about right now is going to participate in that process, I can tell you, we hear that all the time. It's never true. All right. We've been talking a lot about your new lenses. Let's talk a lot more specifically about your new practices. One of the things that is crucial to get squared away when we are trying to work with kids with concerning behaviors and trying to end our use of restraint and seclusion is identifying a student's lagging skills and unsolved problems. Once again, lagging skills help us understand why this kid is responding so poorly to problems and frustrations. Unsolved problems help us know which problems and frustrations the kid is responding poorly to. Identifying a kid's lagging skills and unsolved problems makes intervention proactive, not reactive. We're going to get you out of the heat of the moment. Otherwise, you are in what we might call perpetual survival mode. Many classroom teachers who we've worked with are so overwhelmed by the kids' concerning behaviors, they feel like they're barely keeping their head above water. Well, I get that. But if all we're focused on is the kids' concerning behaviors, we are going to stay overwhelmed. If we can identify the unsolved problems that we could have been busy solving for a very long time now, slowly but surely, we will start to feel less overwhelmed. Focusing on the concerning behavior does not help us feel less overwhelmed. Proactively identifying problems and solving them collaboratively and proactively does help us feel less overwhelmed. I've had many classroom teachers say to me, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. What does that mean? It means we are treading very carefully with this student because we never know when the kid's going to blow. Once you identify a student's lagging skills and unsolved problems, you know exactly when the kid is going to blow, and you are busy about the task of solving those problems collaboratively and proactively so as to ward off the kid blowing and so as to ward off finding yourself in the heat of the moment with an out-of-control kid. Lagging skills and unsolved problems help us caregivers view these kids through much more compassionate, much more accurate, much more productive lenses. And identifying a kid's unsolved problems helps us focus on the problems that are causing concerning behaviors rather than on the concerning behaviors themselves. That's big. How are we going to do it? With an instrument known as the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems. It's free. For me, this should be the standard pre-referral triage instrument in every school, in every special education classroom. What you're seeing here is two sections, lagging skills at the top, unsolved problems at the bottom. It is through this instrument that we are identifying the information that's been missing. Oh, we've known what the kid's concerning behavior has been for a very long time. We've known what psychiatric diagnoses have summarized those concerning behaviors for a very long time. What haven't we known? What are this kid's lagging skills? What are this kid's unsolved problems? The information that's been missing. It should take about 5 minutes to complete the lagging skills section. It's going to take longer to figure out all of the expectations this kid is having difficulty reliably meeting, all of which could give rise to concerning behaviors, all of which could set in motion the sequence of restraint and seclusion. Boy, do we need this information. We've been needing it for a very long time. And I'm not going to teach you how to use it in this video, but I can tell you where you can find an instructional video on how to use the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems, and another video watching it being done, yes, in a school here in Maine. The web address is on your screen right now. I guess I forgot to mention that you might have to do some homework. That's your homework assignment if you choose to accept it. Watch the video showing you how to use this instrument. Watch the video of it being used. The Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems. There's one other thing we're not talking about in our meetings. We're not trying to explain how this kid came to be this way, how this kid came to exhibit concerning behaviors. First of all, the lagging skills section answers that question for us, and that is a research-based answer. Plus, you can't explain how this kid got to be this way with any tremendous level of precision. You don't know if it was the brain injury. You don't know for certain whether it was being exposed to substances in utero. You don't know for sure if it was that the kid has a trauma history. You don't know for sure if it was because the kid was born prematurely. Even more important than that, you really can't do much about those things. Those are explanations. Do I want to know that the kid has a trauma history? Absolutely. That's information I'd want to have about a kid. That they were born prematurely, that they were exposed to substances in utero, that they had a brain injury. I would love to know that stuff. But what I want to know more is what are the lagging skills that may, but also may not, we'll never know for sure, be attributable to those historical factors. I find we focus way too much on history, something about which we may not be able to do anything, when we should be focusing much more on lagging skills and unsolved problems. We are not looking to explain how this kid got to be this way. We are looking to identify lagging skills and unsolved problems. How long should that take? 30 to 45 minutes per kid. Now, some people say 30 to 45 minutes, that's a long time. Think about how much time we've been spending dealing with the kids' concerning behavior. Think about how much time we've been spending in the IEP process and in the testing process and all the meetings we've been having. I think those 30 to 45 minutes are going to save you a ton of time. That's been my experience anyway. You know your homework. That's the instrument. What do we hope happens in an LSIP meeting? We hope light bulbs go on. We hope people say, wow. As in, wow, this kid really is lacking a lot of skills. That is a beautiful wow moment, especially when it is uttered from the lips of someone who wasn't thinking that when they came into the meeting. That's right, this is a meeting. The LSIP is used as a discussion guide in a meeting so that we, the people who are working with the kid in the school, can come together so that we have shared lenses and shared ways of communicating. As I always say, you want to get everybody on the same page? The assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems is going to do it for you. You want to get everybody talking the same language? The assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems is going to get you there. You want to persuade the unpersuaded? The assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems should accomplish the mission. If we leave somebody out of the meeting, and by the way, because I've been in many, many meetings in schools, I know that sometimes the paraprofessional doesn't get to come to the meeting. The ed tech sometimes doesn't get to come to the meeting. The specialists frequently don't get to come to the meeting. Art, music, phys ed. If we don't invite everybody in the building who works with this kid in one way or another to the meeting, in which we're figuring out the kid's lagging skills and unsolved problems, then we are relegating them to an approach to intervention I refer to as winging it. It's the winging it approach to intervention, and what these kids prove to us quite reliably, winging it isn't going to cut it. They need this to be tight. More wow moments. People in the LSIP meeting say things like, no wonder what we've been doing hadn't been working. That is a beautiful wow moment, especially when it is uttered from the lips of someone who came into the meeting thinking we should just keep doing what hadn't been working for the last 3 years. Maybe it'll take at some point. This next one often comes with a rather shaken up look attached. Wow, I'm kind of feeling bad about how I've been treating the kid. Now, what's that person all shook up about? They are now simultaneously reflecting on what they now know about the kid and how they've been treating the kid, and they are coming to the recognition that those two do not square up. You're saying this kid only exhibits concerning behaviors when these unsolved problems pop up? That's right. And you're saying these unsolved problems don't pop up? We know they're coming? That's right. Once you use the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems, this is a very predictable kid. And you're saying we don't have to solve these problems in the heat of the moment? No. By definition, every unsolved problem you've written in on the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems is predictable, and therefore, if we organize this the right way, they can all be solved proactively. One more point. Once we identify all of those unsolved problems, something very interesting starts to happen. Very common experience for adults in an LSIP meeting to say, I didn't realize there were so many things, so many expectations this kid was having difficulty meeting. Are all of these expectations really that important? Probably not. I mean, if I was a kid and I woke up on a school day and knew that I was going to be whacked during that school day with 40 or 50 expectations that I knew I was going to be having difficulty meeting, I don't think I'd get out of bed. Some kids don't. I don't think I'd go to school. Some kids don't. Are we going to be able to solve all of these problems at once? No way. Many of your students who you're thinking about right now are going to have 30, 40, 50 different unsolved problems. You inherited them. That does not mean you are on the hook for solving all of them at once. In fact, you will never be working on more than 3 unsolved problems with a given student at any particular point in time. The rest, you're prioritizing away. Because if you're working on too many problems at once, none of them at all will get solved. So prioritizing is a huge part of what happens after we identify all of those unsolved problems. We now know the mountain that lies before us, and yes, that could feel a little bit overwhelming. You're not going to be working on them all at once. Plus, more good news. You're not going to have to solve all 40 or 50 unsolved problems, because some are going to solve by solving others. If this kid has 40 or 50 unsolved problems, I think you're going to end up solving 10, 12 unsolved problems. More good news. In many kids, not all, but many, you solve the 2 or 3 that are setting in motion concerning behavior most often, you are going to see a dramatic improvement, not only in the kid's behavior, but in your relationship with the kid, in your communication with the kid. Sometimes it's just the top 2 or 3 that get you there. You still have more problems to solve, but you're making a lot of headway already. When you're solving problems collaboratively and proactively with kids, you and the kid are partners, teammates. This is not enemies. This is not adversaries. It never needed to be. This is not about power. Power causes conflict. Collaboration brings people together. We call that process of solving problems collaboratively and proactively Plan B. And I'll be going through the 3 steps that are involved in solving a problem collaboratively and proactively in just a few minutes. But the fact that we call it Plan B suggests that there must be something known as Plan A. There's also something known as Plan C. Let me cover those very quickly. Plan A is when you're solving a problem unilaterally. It's where the adult decides what the solution is and imposes it on the kid. You are almost never using Plan A when you're implementing this model. Why don't you want to be doing Plan A? I can think of at least 4 reasons. There's more, but these are the big ones. Plan A causes concerning behaviors in kids who are prone to concerning behaviors. Why? What just happened? You just threw Plan A at a kid who doesn't have the skills to handle Plan A. What skills? You'll find a whole bunch of them listed on the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. You throw Plan A at a kid who doesn't have the skills to handle Plan A, they will signal that they are having difficulty meeting that expectation through their concerning behavior. Now, an interesting paradox. Who gets more Plan A thrown at them than any other type of kid? The ones with concerning behaviors, the ones least equipped to handle Plan A well. Plan A is not a partnership. Plan A does not involve kids in solving the problems that affect their lives. And solutions that are arrived at through use of Plan A are not only unilateral, they are also uninformed. Uninformed by what's really getting in the way of the kid meeting the expectation. We'll be covering that very soon. Plan C, you've actually already heard about. I just didn't call it Plan C. Plan C is where you're prioritizing, because you can't solve everything at once. And you know that if you try to solve everything at once, you will end up solving nothing at all. Once again, we don't want to be restraining and secluding kids over expectations we already know they're having difficulty reliably meeting.
We still are using all the best practices in terms of education. Student schedules, predictability, research-based strategies in terms of academic programming, experiential programming, social skills instruction. We still are using all those best practices that we know to be true as teachers. However, if we get to a point where a student is escalating, we are considering whether we're placing an expectation on them that they cannot meet. We're asking those questions, we're having those discussions. When we remove an academic expectation, such as writing, we really are hitting the pause button. So it is something that we will come back to. We know that. However, there are some problems around writing that have not been solved, and we need to take some time during that pause to solve those problems and make a plan with the student so that we can get back to the writing in a productive way so that that student can benefit from the instruction.
We're removing that expectation for a period of time until they are in a space where they are able to learn. And then we go right back to teaching the academics again. I know that there was always the concern as well of, well, once we allow them to play all day, they're not going to want to go back to the academic piece. But what I have found is that kids want to be doing what everybody else is doing. They want to be learning. They want to be a part of the class. And when they are able, they very easily just start rejoining back in. Oftentimes, they'll just start, we'll present the option of, we're doing reading right now. Do you think you'd like to? And they will start joining in when they feel that they can. And I've never had a kid ask to, remember when I got to play all day? Like they want to be doing what everybody's doing. They want to be learning.
But Plan C is also for purposes of stabilizing. Because any expectation you have removed from the kid's radar screen, at least for now, won't set in motion concerning behavior, because that expectation is gone for now. Now, I know it's a little uncomfortable to think about removing expectations, but it's a necessity. We've got to organize the effort. We can't put too much on the kid at once. Once again, you inherited all of those unsolved problems. No reason to put pressure on yourself to get them all solved in a week or two. This is a project. The kids in your classroom are a project. They're in your classroom because of all those problems that didn't get solved before you got them. That's why they're in there. If we just keep doing the same thing on those unsolved problems, they're just going to get worse. What about kids who are completely unstable? Those kids are going to need us to have structures in place that are designed toward removing all expectations for purposes of stability. If we don't stabilize this kid, we're not going to get anything else out of the kid until we do.
Another thing is the idea of removing all the expectations. And, we call that like stabilization. It's something that we do in our Tier 3 programs when we can't figure out how to solve the problem, or a student is having difficulty meeting expectations throughout the day. We might, as a team, decide to remove as many expectations as we can, which could include letting that child play all day long. Creating a day where they basically have a choice from things that are preferred or calming for them. They don't have to ever terminate an activity until they're ready to go on to the next activity, and just supporting them through that for a period of time to gain safety and stabilization and give us a little time to figure out how we're going to solve the problem. Sometimes you're able to do that in the classroom. In the classroom, you have other students, and you have a school building which has inherent expectations that you cannot remove. The bells, the lunchtime, the hallway, those kind of things. We have found that it's benefited some students to have access to an environment for a period of time where there are no other students. It's just that student and a teacher, and they have their own space. And it's in a building that's outside of a school, so you don't have to, wrestle with those inherent expectations that are part of every school building. You can remove more expectations than you can in a program that's housed within a school.
So we have a program in our district that is like an out-of-district placement for students. And if we aren't successful in the school setting because the environment isn't working well and the students need more support, more therapeutic support, the environment, one-to-ones, just a setting that's completely different than what they're in now, we will have, through the IEP process, we have children attend there after we've made that determination. And the goal of this particular program is that we're going to bring those kids there for a time. We're going to work with the significant deficits that they have, stabilize them, and then get them back out into their communities as soon as possible. And we've done that successfully with quite a few kids at this point. So what will happen is a student will enter that building, and they may have some really violent behaviors, because once they're violent, we have to figure out a different way after we've tried everything and still not able to meet their needs in the general ed setting, or even in the special ed setting in the public school. So we use this as a more restrictive placement. So that's the goal of it, really, is when they just can't be in their classrooms they could be a special ed classroom, they could be a gen ed setting, that they can't be there because their behaviors are such that people are getting hurt. So we bring them back and we stabilize them, and then we want to get them back out as soon as possible because we want them to be a part of the community. And sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes a year. It just depends on the student.
Let me just cover a misconception about Plan C before we move on to Plan B. Many people hear Plan C and they think giving in. There's nothing in this model about giving in. Giving up? Not that either. Plan C is purely about prioritizing and stabilizing. Let me help you feel a little bit better about Plan C. The kid isn't reliably meeting the expectation anyway. The kid isn't reliably meeting the expectation anyway. So now we have two options. Keep pushing the kid to meet the expectation that we already know the kid cannot reliably meet, cause concerning behavior, and all that goes along with it, or make it official. We don't expect you to meet that expectation yet. And when that expectation does become a higher priority, we're going to help you meet it by solving that problem collaboratively and proactively. So, finally, how do you solve a problem collaboratively and proactively? There are 3 steps. They are called the empathy step, the define adult concern step, and the invitation step. As I always say, the names of the steps don't matter that much. The ingredients matter a great deal. What is the main ingredient of the empathy step? Information gathering. Gathering information from the student about what's making it hard for them to meet a particular expectation. I always tell people, be prepared for jaw-dropping moments in the empathy step when you discover that what you thought was getting in the kid's way is not what's getting in the kid's way. The empathy step is the hardest of the 3 steps. The define adult concern step is next. This is where the caregiver is entering their concern into consideration. The very same concern that might previously have led you into Plan A is now going to lead you into Plan B. Same concern, completely different approach to getting it addressed. The hard part of that step is that us adults frequently don't have the slightest idea what our concerns are. What are we concerned about? What we should be concerned about is why it's important that that expectation be met. How is this unsolved problem affecting the kid? Health, safety, learning. How is this unsolved problem affecting other people? Health, safety, learning. Finally, the invitation. This is where kid and caregiver are collaborating, putting their heads together on a solution. But a solution that must meet 2 criteria. Got to be realistic, meaning Both parties got to be able to do what they're agreeing to do. Got to be mutually satisfactory, meaning the solution truly has to address the concerns of both parties. Here's what I've been saying a lot lately. And world history bears me out on it. If the solution is not realistic and mutually satisfactory, I promise you, this problem is still unsolved.
We are working with the students to help figure out why they're not meeting the expectations, and then making a plan with them that will work for that student to help them achieve the expectation that we're placing on them. They might not be able to meet it today, they might not be able to meet it tomorrow, but at some point you help solve that problem with the student and they will meet the expectation.
Where can you see Plan B being done? On the Lives in the Balance website. The link that is on your screen right now is going to take you to videos where you can see Plan B being done and see all 3 steps in action. That's your other homework assignment. You want to do your assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems homework assignment first. Your Plan B homework assignment is second. You might be wondering, who can't you do Plan B with? We're going to find out. I haven't come across kids who couldn't be engaged in the process of solving the problems that affect their lives. Even the reluctant talkers, even the non-speakers, even kids who've been alienated, disenfranchised, marginalized for a very long time. Even kids who are coming in from home situations that we know are not ideal.
Some of the families that we work with have very complicated family systems, and they're not, oftentimes had their own school experiences that were negative. So it's, and it's important to take time to understand our families, to help them understand their students' difficulties and why they're having difficulties, to partner with them, to help them get access to resources in the community.
So when I know that a kiddo is going home to a less than ideal home situation, it's definitely hard. I just try to do the best that I can for the kid at school. I discovered, it took me a long time to discover, but me going home every night and stressing about it and worrying about it wasn't doing anything to help the child. And it was making me less in a place to come in the next morning and be able to care for my kids and take care of them and teach them in the way that they needed. So I have to remind myself that I'm doing the best that I can for them while they're at school, and then just know that I've done my best and that's all I can do. So I need to put it aside for the night and take care of me so that I can come back and be my best for them tomorrow. And I do try to, maintain communication with the family so we know what's going on. If the family may be open to it, just little suggestions here and there of this is what we're doing at school, maybe it will help at home. Don't try to force anything on the parents, but just little bits here and there that they might be willing to try.
It's important not to judge our families and their difficulties. We want to support them and try to understand how we can help them.
I hope you have found this content to be really useful in helping you start thinking about changes that might need to be made in your setting so as to dramatically reduce and perhaps even ultimately eliminate your use of restraint and seclusion. But remember, this was just an overview. Some people can take the overview and take the ball and run with it. Some people are in circumstances where what you just learned isn't going to be enough. If you are feeling that what you just learned isn't going to be enough, contact us, and we will try very hard to make sure you get the additional help that you need.
I would not say that we're completely done. We're continuing to do professional development, continuing to have opportunities just to meet and see, like, how are things going? What, which kid is struggling with something that we need to maybe work with them on? How can we help each other when we're struggling? So I'd say that it's, probably always going to be a process and a learning path, but I'd say that we've definitely come a long way from where we started.
Now that my mindset has shifted, it's really hard to think about approaching things the way that we used to approach them.
At first, I will be honest, I spent a lot of time, looking back on past kids I had and wishing that I could go back and do things differently and wishing I had done things differently. So I've had to learn to go easy on myself, that I did the best that I could back then, and now I know better, I'm doing better, and I'm just going to continue to learn and grow, and so I give myself a little bit of grace there. I'm definitely proud of how far we've come, that this classroom, this program is running far more smoothly. The kids are happier, they are performing better academically, socially, that even when they do have those escalations or those bumps, that they trust us. They know that we're there to help them, that we're going to work with them.